According to Gandhi, future depends on what we do in the present. Hence, supporting Ukraine today means supporting freedom, independence, and legacy of the great Mahatma. These are the words of the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, who recently posted a carefully worded rhetoric video on X, which aims to coax India to become a mediator between Russia and Ukraine in bringing the war to an end. He also announced his plans to visit India in the coming days, which in itself is quite noteworthy, as it is for the first time since the Russian invasion that India will host the Foreign Minister of Ukraine in New Delhi. Well, this video message instantly puts the world's attention towards India. But let's understand, why is Ukraine painstakingly making efforts in engaging with India, specifically when at the same time there have been reports of massive bombardments reported in the southern Ukraine at this very minute? The immediate reason is India has been invited to participate in a peace conference in Switzerland that will attempt a new initiative to end the war in Ukraine. This makes us ponder, what makes India ideal to mediate this conflict? Primarily, it's the strong India-Russia diplomatic relations, which played a key role in discouraging Russia from launching a nuclear attack inside Ukraine in 2022. Ukraine can confidently rely on the fact that a proposition given by India to Russia for the negotiations would be way more acceptable by Russia than a proposal by some other country. India is not part of NATO or any other power or military alliance around the world. But still, when India speaks, countries of the world always gives an ear to it. Indian diplomacy lately has become the sharpest weapon in the country's arsenal. It is a sign of India's diplomacy coming of age. It has managed to convince the major world powers that its pursuit of self-interest will guide its diplomatic and strategic priorities, while it will stick to a principled position that calls for peace. And how can we forget the presence of Indian diaspora all over the world? Indians in Russia as well as USA can have an increasing influence on not just domestic politics but at the global stage too. Beyond its strong relations with Russia and US, India is an emerging great power, meaning that both Moscow and Washington, as well as Beijing, Western European capitals and other takes position on the war seriously. It is the context of the handling of Ukraine's war negotiations. India would be an asset for the simple fact that it welcomes dialogue with virtually anyone and without any preconditions due to its open door policy. India embodies a balanced perspective which sets the tone of the future peace deal. Finally, there are no other countries as well positioned as India to mediate this conflict. For example, India's only real competitor, China, has clearly thrown all of its eggs in Russia's basket. The 12-point Ukrainian peace plan by Beijing in 2023 was clearly biased and hard to overcome. Early on in the conflict, Indonesia and Israel too tried a hand at diplomacy. They shuttled between Kyiv and Moscow, but both attempts failed because they did not have a leverage over Russia. Turkey, a NATO ally, has pushed Russia and Ukraine for peace negotiations too, but it blamed West for provoking Russia and was preoccupied with earthquake recovery last year. Other countries may come to mind, but reality is that none fits the bill quite like India. India's position on the Ukraine war has been the subject of extensive Western news coverage and criticism since the invasion. India's increased purchases of Russian fuel, numerous abstentions from the UN votes, and New Delhi's refusal to directly criticize Putin sometimes acts as an evidence of India's favoritism towards Moscow. But the reality is quite different. While it is true that the Indian government has not been that vocal like the Western counterparts, it has even not severed the economic ties. A careful reading of Indian diplomacy suggests that New Delhi does not support Russia's war and has repeatedly signaled this disapproval in subtle ways. Let me show you how. When Russia sought India's support for a favorable Security Council resolution on Ukraine, New Delhi strictly declined. Last August, when Ukraine civilians were slaughtered by Russian forces in Bucha, the Indian government condemned the atrocity and called for an international investigation. October 2023, Indian government explained that it was deeply disturbed by the recent turn of developments in Ukraine and insisted dialogue is the only answer. The Indian government continues to refer respect for international laws, UN Charter, the principles of territorial integrity, sovereignty, suggest India does not consider Russia's invasion legitimate. How can we forget Prime Minister Modi's face-to-face meeting with President Putin, where he argued that today's era is not the era of war, which became something that was adopted in the Bali summit too. The US and Europe's double standards on the killing of civilians, bombardments of hospitals and schools in Ukraine versus Gaza has made its position unsellable to the rest of the world. In all of this, India's position has delivered its diplomacy a definite way ahead.